Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Diehl and I'm currently the Vice President of the Interreligious Council of Linn County and the President of the Humanists of Linn County. On this morning's show, we're going to talk about climate change. What should we do? So to help us talk through this hot topic is, no pun intended, is a few panelists that I think are going to make for an interesting show this morning. So if you could just take a few seconds to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and why this particular topic is important to you.
Sure. I'm Adam Sullivan. I'm a columnist at the Gazette, where I usually cover Iowa City news and Iowa news in general. And I care about climate change because I live on the earth, and I want to continue to do so.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I am Jillian Perry, and I created and currently lead the Sunrise Movement Hub in Cedar Rapids. We are an energetic and passionate, inclusive group of citizens, but also very unapologetic in our belief that many of our leaders and policymakers have let us down. There are systems and structures in place that are perpetuating our climate crisis every second of every day. And we like to do something about it. We want the future to be around for Adam to write stories, and for Hogg to be a senator for the rest of his days.
Oh my gosh.
So, I'm happy to have ears and eyes today, and hopefully we feel inspired to do something.
Thank you.
Rob Hogg, state senator here in Cedar Rapids, been concerned about climate change since I was a sophomore at the University of Iowa in the 1980s. Go Hawks. And we're living it now. It's a reality for people around the world, and in Iowa we're experiencing the effects of climate change, and really it is time to act on the issue. So that's why I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you all for participating in this morning's show. So I think you've already touched on it. It is a very, very important subject. It's been all over the news. I know, Rob, you've hosted and are hosting several events here in Cedar Rapids prior to the show and then subsequent to. So it's certainly in the minds of the public sphere. But I think also, Jillian, you have kind of a little different take on it, meaning that you feel like maybe it doesn't get as much attention as you think it should. And maybe we'll start a little bit there and we can see where it goes. But can you talk a little bit about why you think it is important and maybe why you think it's not getting the attention it deserves? So
when the IPCC report came out, the United Nations and a band of scientists from across the world came together and said that we have essentially 12 years to decrease our carbon footprint by 45%, or we're looking at apocalyptic level damage to the entire world. I got really angry because I am 32 and I went to school and I had kids and I did all the right things, and I'm an environmentalist and I hike and I recycle. And I thought, wait, I thought I was doing everything that I was supposed to be doing. And I wasn't, and I got very angry, and I started to find my voice and find my place, and I found that there wasn't a lot of anger and passion. And so I got out there and said, if there's anyone who would like to run as fast as they can with me, let's get together and start making a difference. And the response has been really great. Rob Hogg comes to all of our meetings, and we have people ranging from age of 6, up to in their 70s. College students are showing up, and that's been really motivating. And when we go to events and we talk openly to people at the Cedar Rapids Pride Festival or at Progress Iowa's Corn Feed, within 30 minutes, I had 80 people on just me solo on my Canvas sheet saying, this is something that I care deeply about and I'm afraid. So I think I just sort of stepped in to an opportunity, and a lot of people feel like they would like to do something and talk about it, and they don't have the right kind of outlet to do it.
Rob or Adam, do you have an opinion on why you think there isn't enough conversation around climate change? Or do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, there hasn't been enough conversation historically. I think it's now, I think people have the highest level of concern about it because they're seeing it. It's not normal for a city the size of Paradise, California to burn down. It's not normal for Iowa to suffer 500-year floods in 2008, 2011, 2016, 2019. This is not normal, and it's because our climate is changing. We are experiencing these new extreme events. So the concern is heightened, the awareness is higher, and we know there are solutions that work, right? We did a show a couple months ago, I think, on solar power.
Sure.
That's just one of the hundreds of solutions that work to address climate change, whether it's clean energy solutions, whether it is natural resource solutions, agricultural solutions. There are lots of solutions that work, and so what we need to do is take this heightened awareness and concern and come together as Iowans and as Americans, people around the world, and do those solutions. And I think that's one of the things that's driving the Sunrise Movement, which is a phenomenon across this country, and it's great to have a very active local hub here. There are other groups that are involved in it, Citizens Climate Lobby, Iowa 350, the Sierra Club. There are lots of groups that have been working on this issue, but I think we're at a climate moment when this country is really ready to come together, act on it here, and help lead the world to deal with the problem.
Yeah, and we do want to spend a significant amount of time talking about what we should do, right, about it. And what I do want to talk about a little bit before we get there is, and I think I have your both of you all's read on how important this is, and it's extremely important. Adam, I want to ask you, what do you think? Do you think this is the greatest threat to humanity? Should be the number one thing that we're talking about as a global civilization, or do you feel differently?
Well, I think, first, I don't think it's helpful or appropriate to rank our public policy issues necessarily. I think we have a lot of really important issues. A lot of them threaten people's livelihoods, and so this is one of those issues. It is a big deal. It is a crisis, I would agree. I also think it's a unique issue in that it is uniquely impossible to state how urgent it is, to know how urgent it is. I think you use the word apocalyptic. I don't think the IPCC uses that word, and I think it's good that they don't, because I think that I think there is a risk of, if you employ any kind of hyperbole in this issue, that it turns people off. Because inevitably, if you look back at Al Gore's film from the early 2000s, some of those predictions turned out wrong. I'm worried that gives fodder to climate change skeptics. And so I think it's important to talk about it in sober terms and to recognize that it is a crisis. But if we overstate the case, I think that gives people ammunition to say, well, this turned out to be wrong, so all the science is wrong. In my experience, if you look at the IPCC report, whether it's the 1.5 report or the assessment reports they put out every few years, they're actually really nuanced. They explain, okay, yeah, there are problems with the models. This model says this model says this. That kind of nuance does not lend itself well, certainly to nightly TV news coverage, but even to newspaper coverage. It's really dense stuff. You really have to really read a lot of literature to understand it. And so I think it's a challenge for political communicators, like my friends here, and also for journalists to explain the severity of the problem, but also in terms that people can understand.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Rob,
just to jump in a little bit on that. I mean, on Vice President Gore's movie, The Inconvenient Truth, it's wrong to dismiss it as things being inaccurate in it, because he has material in that absolutely came to pass. I mean, he shows the inundation of the seas in a city like New York, and that didn't happen 80 years from now, like maybe he was thinking. It happened in Hurricane Sandy, right? I mean, one of the things that is difficult about this issue is it's difficult to have precise science about every kind of square inch of the planet. I mean, that is the inherent uncertainty in climate science. But the types of things that scientists have told us about are happening. It's why on June 11th, 2008, I was able to go to my files and pull out the newspaper article that reported state faces more floods, study warns, from 1999. Because we knew the types of things that are going to happen, even if you can't say the precise locations. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, some predictions in the past haven't come true because a lot of this, what the scientists have been telling us, when you go talk to the people at Iowa and Iowa State who study this stuff, they say a lot of what we said was going to be happening 20, 30 years ago is happening.
Absolutely, and that, but I think it's best to be upfront about. Here, we're confident with this much confidence that this might happen, but I think we need to be real about that instead of saying this is a certainhood. And I would also make the caveat that perhaps the models are wrong and that they're not aggressive enough. Perhaps this comes on even more quickly. But I think I think there's an inclination with some climate activists to say, well, this is definitely going to happen in X number of years, and I think that does a disservice to the cause.
And Jill, I'd like Jillian to jump in here because I know you're passionate about this. And what is your thought? This idea that, you know, the models could differ and there's a little uncertainty there. This idea of talking in these very kind of dogmatic terms or terms of certainty, right? That are kind of open to being disproved. And then, you know, you kind of lose credibility. What do you think about that?
I think that our nation does a lot of hiding behind nuance. And I think that when they say, well, let's hang on, let's not do something because it may or may not come exactly to fruition, we now find ourselves 30 years and 40 years later in a massive heartache of a problem. And so we can say it might not be exactly perfect, so let's do nothing. We could say it might not be exactly perfect, so let's do a little bit. Or we could say it might not exactly be perfect, but there's so much we could be doing for our citizens right now that would not only increase their well-being, their personhood, their community, our schools and our companies, that would affect climate and affect the prosperity of our country. So I understand that things might not turn out exactly as studies might say, but why the heck not do anything? It's the models show that when we invest in our people and we invest in our communities and we start electing leaders who stand up for us, the better we are as a country.
Yeah.
So I hear you and I respect that. I just don't like to hide behind that because I think that we could be better in so many regards. And I'll say one other thing. Climate change is one of the most intersectional policy issues right now. So when you look at healthcare, climate change is actually affecting children's health. The way that many of our farmers and the way that many of our manufacturers are participating in this economy is affecting people's health right now. You also look at the way in which people are living in their communities and in their buildings, and living conditions are not safe. And so, yes, there are many other things that are incredibly important, tremendously important, but there's also ways in which our climate crisis is affecting every one of those policy points.
I just want to clarify.
Sorry, I went backwards a little bit.
My comment wasn't for or against any type of action. It's about the way we talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And so if we want to take the types of action that you support, we need way more people that support it, right? Congress is not going to do this unless we convince those people. I wonder if the way that we communicate it is preventing us from getting more people on board. And so it's not against any type of drastic action. I think that probably is appropriate. But I think there are a lot of people who are skeptical of the science because here and there, certain things have turned out to be wrong, right? And so I think there are ways that we can commit to the types of actions you want to take, but also talk about it in a sober way and say there's uncertainty here. It's not a certain thing.
And we talked a little bit earlier before the show, Jillian, about how sometimes because it is such a huge issue, right? And you could even say complex issue that does impact so much of our life. And there is maybe, because it's 30 years from now or 10 years from now or whatever, people are oftentimes weighing that against, I still need cheap oil, I still need my paycheck, I still have these needs today, and if we address this climate change in 40 years, that's going to possibly, hinder me from having this, and so therefore they're kind of weighing this, and choosing kind of the former need over maybe addressing a distant, for potentially, potential disaster. They're not sure if it's, can or can't happen. So do you think that plays into a little bit? I don't want to spend too much time on this. I really do want to get into what you think are some tangible things that we can start doing as a country. But is there any just quick comments on if you think that's part of the problem as to why people maybe aren't as fired up about it as they should be?
Well, I don't think there's any question that is part of the problem, is it has been presented as this far-off issue. And what has changed, and this change is is happening as we speak, right?
Yeah.
People are realizing it. You know what? It's not normal to have Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Maria and the Paradise Fire and
Happening
Hurricane
all
Florence.
at the same time.
All happening at the same time.
Right.
And people are now experiencing this. So that's part of it. But here's the other thing that's happened, and I said this at the outset. We have solutions that work that people can do. So the person who's worried about the paycheck or worried about the cost of their energy, guess what? I've got a better solution, right? We can have the energy efficient solar powered air conditioning system that's going to save you money and, by the way, create local jobs, because it's going to be people installing solar panels and installing the new energy efficient air conditioning system, right? So we can create jobs, save people money. The solutions work. Grow businesses, improve our health, as Jillian was talking about, and we've come together at the, I mean, this is the climate moment where, okay, you know, Americans, I think because of some of the reasons we've talked about it, we've been pretty skeptical about climate change as a country. You know, we'll kind of a wait and see, show me, right? Like a bunch of people from Missouri, right? We want to see it. Well, now we're seeing it, and we're seeing the solution simultaneously. So we're really acting. You know, the solar energy industry is growing in Iowa. We have nearly 1,000 Iowans working in the solar energy industry, in an industry that didn't exist 7 years ago. Those are real jobs for real people.
Yeah, so I think an interesting, maybe a pivot point here is really getting into what we can do, and you mentioned a little bit. I think some of the reports, the IPCC, for instance, was referenced, and it's a very credible report, and I read through it, and you know, kind of the consensus seems to be that we have, you know, even if we were to stop emitting all carbon emissions tomorrow, right? We're still at a point now. There's enough carbon in the air that you know, a lot of the stuff that we're forecasting that could happen, rising sea levels, so on and so forth, are still going to happen, right?
Correct.
Like it's going to take more drastic action. And you know, we talked about it not being an individual solution, right? This is it. We have to come together as a globe and address this. One of the big things is, well, even if the United States were to just completely stop emitting carbon tomorrow, well, you have these huge emerging economies, Africa being one, over the next 20 to 50 years, that are going to be heavily dependent on fossil fuels and currently don't have, you know, the technology maybe to have a non-carbon based energy source. So what do you think are some of the solutions, again, kind of thinking, you know, 100,000 feet here over the next 10 to 30, 40 years, as I'm talking about a global community here, are one of the keys to addressing you know, runaway climate change and assuming the worst, right? To your point, we're going to assume the worst. So what do we do?
Number one is we have to start holding our elected leaders accountable. They can run on climate and talk about climate all they want while they're campaigning, but when it comes to their vote in Congress, they have to vote that way. Fossil fuel money has to get out of politics immediately so that we have people who are making policy and voting on policy that is clean and healthy and productive for us and living in the climate crisis. Number two, I want people to stop thinking that this is something that they can solve by buying the right products in the supermarket. I want them to stop thinking this is about having an electric car. Things that they should be doing. I don't mean to say they shouldn't. But we have to understand that we are citizens, not consumers. So that means that we talk to our neighbors, we hold our elected leaders accountable, and we feel that there is a power in our voice when we stand up, because our policymakers need to know that we care. And there are policy measures like the Green New Deal that could put America on a global map to making it the coolest thing to have a high-wage job, health insurance, installing solar panels. It could be the coolest thing to be a sustainable farmer in Solon, Iowa, because there's support and progress and income there to do it. That's possible. We all need to understand that this is America, and we're proud, and we're really smart, and we can get this done, but money and fossil fuel and corruption needs to come out of politics.
We do have the real challenge of transitioning away from fossil fuels.
That's right.
And we need to do that. And part of the answer is we've got to stop spending money on fossil fuel infrastructure, and because that's there might be some little thing here and there you can do, but in general we got to move away from that towards this clean energy future. Then, Alan, as you were talking about, is we've already got all this greenhouse gas pollution in our atmosphere, and it's going up rapidly. And even if you could stop it, I mean, if we do all this on the transition away from fossil fuels, you still have to deal with the fact that it's in the air. So that requires, in my mind, natural resource solutions, watershed solutions,
That's right.
managing our water. So whether you're dealing with flooding or drought, you've got to have natural resources to take carbon out of the atmosphere. We got to pay farmers for the environmental services they're providing.
That's right.
Or we want farmers to provide. If they're not providing, we've got to make this shift so that we're getting the carbon out of the atmosphere into the soil. Do those things, protecting our forests globally.
Yeah.
And the global issue, let me just say, because you mentioned that, the fact that the United States can't solve this problem by itself, first of all, doesn't absolve us our responsibility to be part of the solution, but it also makes it more incumbent for the United States to be a leader on the issue. And at this moment, the United States pulling out of the Paris Agreement, terrible thing to do. We need to stay in the Paris Agreement and make it better, right? And do even more.
And if I could,
I did have a question for you, but go ahead.
if I could revisit something Senator Hogg said about. So I come at this from a conservative or libertarian perspective, and you mentioned that there's ways that the government actually incentivizes you to use dirtier fuel, right? And so even if you're not ready to buy into all of climate change, or you're not ready to take drastic action, you can at least say, well, let's at least stop encouraging the bad stuff, right? So energy is not a free market in this country, right? The government has always been very heavily involved with that, and so I think that's, if you're a conservative or a libertarian, I think that's at least a starting place. It's like, well, we know that even if you don't believe in climate change, we know that air pollution is bad for your lungs, right?
That's right.
And that we know that if you have junk in your water, that's bad. So at least if we can get that far, I think we can start working on those bigger solutions too.
And he made a comment, Rob did, about transitioning away from fossil fuels, right? I mean, fossil fuels are bad, and fossil fuels are dirty. And I'm sure if we had somebody on from any of these energy companies, oil companies, they may push back and say, well, we have cleaner alternatives. We have these carbon capture and storage technologies. We're investing, like BP was researching. They investing tens of billions of dollars in renewable energies and trying to restore the environment through different technologies. So, in your opinion, and maybe. What is the right way to transition away from fossil fuels? I mean, the reality is it does bring in billions and billions of dollars to the United States, U.S. economy that does ultimately go to helping develop some of these other greener technologies. And
I think I think the key is to not be set on any one technology or any one set of technology. If you say that the solar panels and wind turbines that exist now are going to be the solution forever and ever, I know I don't agree with that. I think we need to be open to nuclear, whether we can make nuclear cheaper to build and easier to build. I think we need to be open to all sorts of stuff. I mean, the politicians say all of the above portfolio or whatever. I don't think that's quite right. I think that's kind of a cop-out so that they can still support oil and coal. But we're going to have to be open to the possibility in 50 years a new technology exists, and that's the impact that the United States can make on the world, and the impact we've made on the world throughout our history is that we invent things that people can use and that make people's lives better.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, there are kind of two major policies that you could do it. One is if you put a price on carbon, on greenhouse gas pollution, if you put a price on it, tax or however you would do that, over time, people are going to shift away and innovate away from that, right? And so I support a carbon tax, always have. The other idea is the Green New Deal, which is a large public investment on the things that work, where you just directly are putting more people to work, and that's another option. By the way, you can do both of those. I mean, I'm in favor of doing both because I think this issue is that important, and people don't need to fear those solutions. There's a lot of misinformation out there right now about the Green New Deal. Probably don't have time to get into all of that, but there's a lot of misinformation about it. It's a concept about a big infrastructure investments in not just clean energy infrastructure, but clean water infrastructure and other sustainable infrastructure. But if you do those things, the other challenge is because this is something that affects us all. The libertarian philosophy is each kind of person on his or her own at some level, but at some point a single person can't stop climate change. We really do need to use public policy, and I believe that if you're smart about that, you actually increase the chances for freedom and participation, right, if you do it right.
Yeah. So, question for you, Jillian. There's a organization called it's called the Decarbonization Pathways Project, comprised of numerous research teams, and they concluded, based on their research, that we would actually need to move to roughly 30 to 60% of our electricity, our need for electricity from nuclear power by the year 2050. Just specifically, what is the Sunrise Movement's stance on nuclear power as a way to address climate change? And we have about 4 minutes.
I wouldn't be able to speak to that very well, and I don't know if Rob, if you have any insight there. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the Sunrise Movement specifically has addressed it, and we should find
so.
that out.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, I'm skeptical about it for a couple reasons. First of all, the expanding the nuclear power industry tends to be, first of all, it tends to take a long time, it tends to be very expensive. And the way the energy market is moving is towards cheaper, quicker solutions like energy efficiency, like solar panels. Obviously, you know, we've had debates on this program, I think, before about existing nuclear plants. It wasn't my idea to shut down the Duane Arnold plant, but it will be shutting down in a few years because that was an economic decision. So the other thing I would say is, I think people have kind of felt like, well, we have this, well, we can always go nuclear. Well, it's not, it really isn't that easy. I mean, there are some significant problems to go from where we are in the country right now with 100 nuclear power plants to trying to build 2,000 to 3,000 of them. That, in terms of the cost, in terms of just the mechanics of trying to generate the fissionable material to do that, I don't think that's an easy issue. I think it's quicker and cheaper to do what in another era would have been called the softer energy solutions.
Yeah.
If I could just quickly, you're right, it is difficult to do right now. I think it's possible we could develop and change that. But I do want to point out in the IPCC 1.5 degree report, they set out these pathways to how do we keep the increase to 1.5 degrees. Every single one of those pathways included nuclear, and most of them were called for extra nuclear. And so if we're going to listen to the experts and if we rely on the IPCC, we have to say that nuclear is part of the solution.
Yeah. So we only have about a minute and a half, but I just end with this question for each one of you, 30 seconds. If you could, I'm an individual, I'm watching this at home, what do you recommend is the number one thing they can do as an individual? I know we've talked about it being a global thing, but as an individual, what should I do, and what do you think is the greatest way that I can address climate change?
I would say educate yourself and read more than just the headline, read more than just the 100-word story. If you can, dig down into these reports, because it is complicated and there's a lot of nuance, but that's the first step is really understanding the problem.
Thank you.
There are many organizations and people who are fighting tirelessly for not a single penny. Throw your voice behind us, behind me, throw your voice behind Rob. Support us in however you can, if that means showing up, if it means giving us a like on Facebook, because we need all the help we can get, grassroots movements.
Very brief.
Get more informed, more involved, do more, speak up more.
Excellent. All right. Well, like usual, it's a fascinating topic that we could talk hours about, but again, I appreciate everybody joining this morning and hope you have a great Sunday morning yourself. Thank you for tuning in. Take care.